Gulliver's Travels by Jonathan Swift. Travels Part 4. A Voyage to the Country of Huaniminim. Chapter 1. The author sets out as a captain of a ship. His men conspire against him, confine him a long time to his cabin, set him on shore in an unknown island. He travels up in the country. The Yahoos, a strange sort of animal described. The author meets two Hunimims. I continued at home with my wife and children about 5 months in a very happy condition, if I could have learned the lesson of knowing when I was well. I left my poor wife big with a child, and accepted an advantageous offer to make me captain of the Adventure, a stout merchantman of 350 tons, for I understood navigation well, and being grown weary of a surgeon's employment at sea, which, however, I could exercise upon the occasion. I took a skilful young man of that calling, one Robert Purefoy, into my ship. We set sail from Portsmouth on the 2nd day of August, 1710. On the 14th, we met with Captain Pogock of Bristol, at the Tanariff, who was going to the Bay of Campeche to cut logwood. On the 16th, he was parted from us by a storm. I heard since my return that his ship was foundered, and none escaped but one cabin boy. He was an honest man, a good sailor, but a little too positive in his own opinions, which cause of his destruction, and it hath been of several others. For if he had followed my advice, he might have been home safe with his family at this time, as well as myself. I'd several men died in my ship of calentures, and so that I was forced to get recruits out of Barbados and the Leeward Islands, where I touched by the direction of merchants who employed for me, which I soon too much cause to repent, for I found afterwards that most of them had been buccaneers, and I had 50 hands on board, and my orders were that I should trade with the Indians in the South Sea, and make whatever discoveries I could. These rogues whom I picked had debauched my other men, and formed a conspiracy to seize my ship and secure me, which they did one morning, rushing into my cabin and binding me hand and foot, threatened me to throw me overboard if I offered to stir. I told them I was their prisoner and I would submit. They made me swear to do, and they unbounded me, only fastening one of my legs in a chain near my bed, and placed a sentry at the door with his piece charged, who was commanded to shoot me dead if I attempted my liberty. They sent me down victuals and drinks, and took the government of the ship to themselves. Their design was turned to pirates, and plundered the Spaniards, and they could not do till they got more men. But first they resolved to sell the goods in the ship, and go to Madagascar for recruits. Several among them had died since my confinement. They sailed many weeks and traded with the Indians, but I knew not what course they took, being kept a close prisoner in my cabin, and expecting nothing less than to be murdered, as they often threatened me. Upon the 9th day of May 1711, one James Welch came down to my cabin. He said he had orders from the captain to set me ashore. I expostulated with him, but in vain. Neither would he so much tell me who their new captain was. They forced me into the long boat, letting me put on the best suit of clothes, which were as good as new, and a small bundle of linen, but no arm except my hanger. They were so civil as not to search my pockets, into what I conveyed what money I had, and set some of the little necessities. They rowed about a league, then set me down on the strand. I desired them to tell them what country it was. They all swore. They knew no more than myself, but said that the captain, as they called him, was resolved, after they had sold the lading, to get rid of me in the first place. Where they could discover land, they pushed off immediately, advising me to make haste, for fear of being overtaken by the tide, and so bade me farewell. In this desolate condition, I advanced forward, and soon got upon firm ground, where I sat down on the bank to rest myself, and considered what best I had best to do. When I was a little refreshed, I went up into the country, resolving to deliver to the first savages I should meet, and purchase my life from them by some bracelets, glass rings, and other toys which sailors usually provide themselves with those villages, and whereof I should about me. The land was divided into long rows of trees, not regularly planted, but naturally growing. There was great plenty of grass, and several fields of oat. I walked very circumspectly for fear of being surprised, or suddenly shot in an arrow from behind or either side. I fell into a beaten road, where I saw many tracks of human feet, and some of cows, but most of horses. And at last I beheld several animals in a field, and one or two of the same kind sitting in a tree. Their shape very singular and deformed, with a little discomposed me, so I laid down behind a thicket to observe them better. Some of them coming forward near the place where I lay, and gave me an opportunity of distinctly marking their form. Their heads and breasts were covered in thick hair, some frizzled and others lank. They had beards like goats, and long ridge of hair behind their backs, and the forepart of their legs and feet, but the rest of their bodies were bare, so that I might see their skin, which were a brown buff colour. They had no tails, nor any hair at all on their buttocks, except about the anus, which, I presume, nature had placed it there to defend them as they sate down on the ground. For this posture they used, as well as lying down, stood on their hind feet. They climbed high trees, as nimbly as squirrels, for they had strong extended claws, before and behind, terminating in sharp points, and hooked. They would often spring, bound, and leap with prodigious agility. The females were not so large as the males. They had long lank hair on their heads, but none of them on their faces, nor anything on a sort of down on the rest of the bodies, except on the anus and pudenda. Their tongues hung from their 4 feet, and often reached about to the ground, as they walked. The hair of both sexes were of several colours, brown, red, black, and yellow. Upon the whole, I never beheld in all my travels so disagreeable an animal, nor one against which I naturally conceived so strong an antipathy, so that thinking I had seen enough, full of contempt and aversion, I got up and pursued the beaten road, hoping it direct me to the cabin of some Indian. I had not gone far when I met one of these creatures full in my way, coming up directly to me. The ugly monster, when he saw me, distorted in several ways every feature of his visage, and he stared as an object he had never seen before. Then, approaching nearer, lifted up his forepaw, whether out of curiosity or mischief, I could not tell. I drew him my hanger, and gave him a good blow with the flat side of it, for I durst not strike him with the edge, fearing the inhabitants might be provoked against me, if they should come to know that I had killed or maimed one of their cattle. When the beast felt smart, he drew back, and roared so loud that a herd of at least 40 came flocking about me from the next field, howling and making odious faces. But I ran to the body of a tree, leaning my back against it, kept them off by waving my hanger and leaning my back against it, keeping them off. The branches leaped up in a tree, from whence they began to discharge their excrement on their head. However, I escaped pretty well by sticking close to the stem of the tree, which was almost stifled by the filth, which fell about me on every side. In the midst of this distress, I observed them all to run away all of a sudden as fast as they could, at which I ventured to leave the tree and pursue the road, wondering what it was that could put them in a fright. But looking at my left hand, I saw a horse walking softly into the field, where my persecutor, having sooner discovered, was the cause of their flight. The horse started a little when he came near me, but soon recovering himself, looked full in my face with a manifest of tokens of wonder. He viewed my hands and feet, walking round me, and several times. I would have pursued my journey, but he placed himself directly in the way, yet looking with a very mild aspect, never offering the least violence. We stood gazing at each other for some time. At last I took the boldness to reach my hand towards his neck, with a design to stroke it, using the common style and whistle of jockeys when they are going to handle a strange horse. But this animal, seeming to receive my civilities with disdain, and shook his head, and bent his brow softly, raising up his right foot to remove my hand. Then he neighed 3 or 4 times. But it is so different a cadence, I almost began to think that he was speaking to himself in some language of his own. While he and I were thus employed, another horse came up, who was applying himself to the first in a very formal manner. They gently struck each other right to before, neighing several times by turning, and varying the sounds, which seemed to be almost articulate. They went some paces back off, as if it was to confer together, by walking back and side by side, backwards and forwards, like persons deliberating on some affair or weight. But I often turning their eyes towards me, as if I watched that I might not escape. I was amazed to see such actions and behaviours in such a brute beast, and concluded with myself that if the inhabitants of these countries were endued with the proper degree of reason, they must need the wisest people upon earth. This thought gave me so much comfort that I resolved to go forward until somewhat I could discover some house or village, or meet with any of the natives, leaving the 2 horses to discourse together as they pleased. But the first, who was a dapple grey, observing me to steal off, neighed after me in so expressive a tone that I fancied myself to understand what he meant, whereupon I turned back, and came near him, to expect his farther commands. But concealing my fear as much as I could, for I began to be in some pain, how this adventure might terminate, and the reader will easily believe I did not much like the present situation. The 2 horses came up close to me, rubbing with great earnestness upon my face and hands. The grey steed rubbed my hat all round with his right forehoof, and discomposed it so much that I was forced to adjust it better by taking it off and settling it again. Whereat he and his companion, who was a brown bay, appeared to be much surprised, and the latter felt the lappet of my coat, and finding it to hang loose about me, they looked with new signs of wonder. He stroked my right hand, seeming to admire the softness and colour, but he squeezed it so hard between his hoof and his pastern that I was forced to roar, which they both touched me with all possible tenderness. They were under great perplexity about my shoes and stockings, which they felt very often, neighing to each other, and using various gestures not unlike those of a philosopher, when he would attempt to solve some new and difficult phenomenon. Upon the whole, the behaviour of these animals was so orderly, their rational, so acute in justice and Judaeus, that I at last concluded they must need to be magicians, who had thus metamorphosed themselves upon some design, seeing a stranger in a way, resolved to divert themselves with him, or perhaps was really amazed at the sight of a man, so differently in habit, feature, and complexion from those who might probably live in so remote a climate. Upon the strength of this reasoning, I venture to address them in the following manner. Gentlemen, if you be conjecturers, I have a good cause to believe that you understand any language, and therefore I make bold to let your worships know that I am a poor distressed Englishman, driven by his misfortunes upon your coast, and I entreat you, one of you, to let me ride upon his back, as if he were a real horse, to some house or village, where I can be relieved. In return of which favour, I will make you a present with this knife and bracelet." Taking them out of my pocket, the two creatures stood silent while I spoke, seeming to listen with great attention, and when I had ended, they neighed frequently to each other, as if they were engaged in some serious conversation. I plainly observed, the language expressed the passions very well. The words might with little pains be resolved into alphabet more easily than Chinese. I could frequently distinguish the word Yahoo, which was repeated by each of them several times, and although it was impossible for me to conjecture what it meant, yet while the two horses were busy in conversation, I endeavoured to practise this word upon my tongue, and as soon as they were silent, I boldly pronounced a Yahoo in my voice, imitating at the same time, as near as I could, the neighing of a horse, at which were both visibly surprised. The grey repeated the same word twice, as if he meant to teach me the right accent, wherein I spoke after him as well as I could, and found myself perceivably to improve every time, though very far from any degree of perfection. Then the Bay tried me with a second word, much harder to be pronounced, but reducing it to the English orography. May be spelt thus, Huaniminum. I did not succeed in this so well as the former, but after two or three farther trials, I had better fortune. In both appeared amazed at my capacity. After some farther discourse, which I conjectured might relate to me, the two friends took their leave, with the same compliment of striking each other's hoofs. The grey made me signs that I should walk before him, and wherein I thought it prudent to comply, till I could find a better director. When I offered to be slackened at my pace, he would cry Hewn, hewn. I guessed his meaning, and gave to understand, as well as I could, that I was weary, and not able to walk faster, upon which he would stand a while to let me rest.